Aaron, you've been very quiet so far.
Well, I'm just surprised, you know, if you're going to make animals out of meat, I mean, let's say that you're going to make one animal and you're going to make it out of bologna, and you're going to make it out of bacon, and you're going to make it out of pork chops and ham, and it's all one animal, and that's the one you're not going to let people eat. I mean, that's the one that's forbidden. The one that's made out of bacon, that's the one that's forbidden. It's just so unfair.
Yeah. Rape village and have slaves, abuse your children, but no meat.
Can I just
at least not bacon.
Just going back to one of the points that Concordance raised and the feasibility of the Ark actually being physically possible and whether it would float or not. You're probably aware that it's in Kentucky that they're building a Noah's Ark Adventureland. I think Answers in Genesis is behind it. And they're actually building a life-size replica, if such can exist, of the Ark. But interestingly enough, they're building it on land. They're not going to allow it to float. I wonder why. Anyway,
I think they should put all the people who come to the exhibit inside it and then fill it with water. Just a science experiment. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think, you know, I have Norse heritage. I follow some of the things, and I see replicas of drakirs built and sailed from Sweden to the Hudson Bay and that sort of thing. So it seems perfectly justifiable that you would build an ark out of those materials and in those dimensions, and that you should, you know, just attempt to duplicate the whole thing. Identify which are the kinds of animals that you should put on board, and you know, spend a year abroad at sea proving the point. But we all know why they won't do that. We all know that the whole thing about the flood is it's a matter of pretend. It's all pretend, and the people who are promoting this know that. I mean, there are some people who have never given this any thought. There was me as a child. I mean, I had everybody in my world had told me that the flood had happened. And as a child, I didn't question that too much. I went to school, and then I mentioned something about the flood, and one of my teachers, I'm so happy that he did this, laughed at me and said, there wasn't any flood. Think about it. How could there have been a flood? And the fact that he asked me that, and I have to think, oh, yeah. You know, I mean, finally, yeah, think about it. Crap, there couldn't have been a flood, could there? It's ridiculous. The idea is completely preposterous. If nobody ever mentions that to you, you might never notice it. If everybody believes it, and that's what this pretend game means, it means getting everybody to sign on with the same thing. Oh, yeah, we buy that. We don't think at all about these sorts of things. What had happened, evidently, according to a comparison of the geology, the archaeology, and what we know of the history at the time, these overlapping fields indicate that around 2900 BCE, in the Iraqi floodplain, centered on the city of Shuruppak, at the end of what the archaeologists declare as the Jemdat Nasr period in Iraq, there was a flood. It probably was not rain. It was some sort of other deluge, perhaps. There was a storm involved. Storm surge is most likely. But you can look up these charts online to show the extent of the flood and the depth of the flood, which was 22 feet, or 15 cubits. Happened roughly 2900 BC. The original accounts of this flood are very grisly in their details, in the carnage, the people's bodies floating by. The boat was a river barge owned by people who already had use of these items, who already used these things in their employ. The central character's name is Ubartutu, Ziasudra, Utnapishtim, Atrahasis, depends on which region you get the story from. People talk about there being flood stories all around the world and that they're all concordant, but they're not, because if you go to Greece, the stories there are that the people survived by going to the hilltops. If you go to the Americas, people survived by floating in a clamshell. And then in China, there was a guy who caused the flood by going to a mountaintop after he lost a war and using his spear to pierce the firmament of the sky, which tore a hole in the sky, the firmament, which let in all the water above the firmament, which Genesis mentions. And the Chinese Naga goddess named Nukwa had to come and repair the damage and drain the flood. So we're talking about several different things we know didn't really happen. And these are the most antiquated versions of the stories. The stories from the Iraqi area, Sumeria, Babylon, etc., these are the ones that are all talking about the same event. These were at least 1,000 years before the character was recast as Noah. These were kept as oral traditions, retold again and again and again. Key details remained the same, like releasing the bird to go find land and that sort of thing. One of the things that changed was mountaintop versus hilltop. It was a depth of 22 feet. That's all that it was. And so when the barge finally comes to rest and the people come out, there are still people in other lands. There are still survivors, people who have never seen the flood and didn't know anything about it, and who centuries later would have to have other people from this area say, yeah, we had a really terrible flood here. And eventually this story is written down and exaggerated to ridiculous proportions. And then people who want to promote something on faith exaggerate it again and refuse to accept the reality of the situation. And what you end up with there is people like Andrew Snelling, who was a geologist in Australia, who originally dated rock formations in Australia to their correct ages using correct means. And he dated formations in the billions of years old. But he decided that this was not in concert with the creationist beliefs that he embraced. So he simultaneously wrote articles for Answers in Genesis, or the magazine that eventually became Answers in Genesis, wherein he contested his own findings and wrote that the world could not be more than 6,000 years old, etc. And he wrote that the reason that this was because to declare anything else would violate Scripture. It had nothing to do with evidence. It was all about promoting Scripture. So there is a huge amount of exaggeration and dishonesty here. And these people at some point know that. And it's all a matter of pretend. And
just going back to the classical account, so far as I understand, the way in which the apologists try and explain it is that there weren't mountains as great as there are now. They are actually a consequence of the Earth collapsing in and losing all the water, which is ejaculated, and hence you get the Lulu-Bukaki hypothesis. But the Ark did come to rest on Mount Ararat, which is, I think, a few thousand feet above sea level. But somebody posted a comment and asked, isn't Ararat a volcano? I think it is, and I think that's one of the explanations for how we get various animals in various parts of the world, so far as I understand the story. Don't ask me to explain, it's just what I've heard. Concordance wants to make a quick comment, and then we're going to take the first caller.
Well, I just wanted to read really briefly from Genesis 8, a funny scripture I like. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. So he burned, I guess, one of every beast and clean fowl. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. But the Lord smelled a sweet savor. It's just so funny, like, what you cooking?
The part I like is the fact that he gives us a rainbow as a covenant that he will never commit global genocide again by flooding us. But you just look at the book of Revelation and you find out that, okay, he's not going to flood us, he's going to burn us all to death. But anyway, let's get the first caller in. He's been waiting very patiently. Robert, welcome to the show.